We will start. We'll start the meeting and then we'll adjourn for 5 minutes.
Okay, so the recording has started, right?
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Councillor Dogan.
Thank you, Naz. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Audit Committee meeting. I'm Councillor Dogan. I'm the chair of this committee. What we're going to do, so we have started the meeting, but we are waiting for the officer from another meeting. So we will adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes to ensure that he can join us. So I hope that's okay. Because there's only one item on the agenda and that officer needs to present the report and he's in another meeting. He's running slightly late.
We can do it one time.
We can do, but we can leave it for 5 minutes and then we'll once Tim joins back and do the rundown. Okay.
Councillor Turpin, do you think there's maybe this isn't a good suggestion, maybe it is, who knows,
Sorry.
about whether we might be able to
Sorry, the audio stopped. Now I cannot see the room.
Sorry, Councillor Rossetti, the meeting is adjourned at the moment. The meeting is officially adjourned, so I can only restart it after the meeting reopens. I'm sorry about that, but we do have to do that.
Okay, in the meantime, I will try to log out and come back in because I can see my camera flickering. So that there might be problems with my camera.
And so Rossetti will start the meeting very shortly.
Okay, be a couple of minutes, no longer than that. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
she's got down?
She's a... I can't see. She's still in the meeting.
Like my camera is working.
So Rossetti, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you, yes.
Right, we're going to start the meeting very shortly. Yeah,
I'm not.
just here. Right. Good evening, everyone. Apologies for the delay. So our officer has just joined us, so we'll continue with the meeting. So my name is Councillor Dogan. I'm the chair for this committee. Please note that this meeting is recorded by the councils for live and subsequent broadcast via the council's internet site. Officers will introduce themselves when speaking. Apologies for absence, Naz.
There are no apologies for absence, Chair, but Councillor Rossetti is attending online.
Thank you very much, that's noted. In urgent business.
There are no items of urgent business.
Declaration of interest. Anybody? No?
Through you, Chair.
Yes.
Chair, sorry, I just wanted to note for the record that Councillor Rossetti is attending not as a member of the committee and won't be voting or moving resolutions, but will be entitled, with your consent, to take part in the debate.
That's fine. That's noted. Thank you. Right, so any deputations? None? None. Okay. So now, can I now invite the officers to introduce the report? Lead is Tim McGriffin. If you can introduce your report, please.
Yes, good evening, Chair.
Good evening, Tim.
Apologies for that. My system is a bit slow, so if there is any lag, please do let me know, and I'll just have to turn my camera off. All right, so the report I'll be introducing to you this evening is the Treasury Management Strategies.
You can just start from the beginning, you just got cut off.
Okay. I'm going to take my camera off, but do let me know if you can still hear me, okay? Yeah, is that okay? All good for sound?
That sounds better. Thank you, Tim.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, so the report that I'll be presenting to this committee this evening is the draft Treasury Management Strategy for 2024-2025. Apologies again for joining you a little bit late. Earlier this evening, I was presenting the same item to the for their own comments on the report. So in terms of how this is it goes in Haringey, is the CIPFA code which Haringey signed up to. There is a requirement for the council to approve a treasury strategy every year. And in our processes, as per our constitution, the audit committee has been identified as the committee that can make these, that can approve or make the recommendation for this treasury strategy to be adopted by full council.
Sorry, Tim, we're having trouble
Hearing you, Tim.
hearing you. Could you speak up maybe a bit?
Or maybe become a bit closer to the mic that you're speaking to.
Okay, no problem. Let me just see if I can do something differently. If you could just bear with me.
To hear you.
Hello, good evening. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but it is a different sound. Try
Tim,
to say something.
can you just say a few words?
How is it for the sound? How is it for the sound quality?
It's good on my end, but obviously it looks like it's different in the room.
In the room?
There's been a very background noise. I don't know where it's coming from. So, Tim, can you just speak?
Hello, good evening.
That's better. Yeah. That's better.
Is that better? Okay, I'm gonna try on here, and do let me know if there are any issues. So yeah, so the report I am presenting this evening is the Treasury Strategy Statement for 2024-2025. It is a requirement for the council to approve a treasury strategy before the start of each year. This is usually in line with the budget setting process for the council. So the council will consider its budget, and as part of that is treasury management, which essentially outlines the risk framework for the council to undertake its treasury activities such as borrowing, investing, and managing its cash flows. So at Haringey, the committee that is responsible for formulating and implementing the strategy is the audit committee as per the constitution. But before the audit committee has an opportunity to make this recommendation and agree this draft treasury statement, it goes to the scrutiny committee, who I was just meeting earlier this evening, hence why I was a bit late. And they basically will provide any comments and further feedback. So from the meeting this morning, this evening, the main recommendation that's come from scrutiny is for there to be an interest rate sensitivity included as part of the budget, and that's something that's already been captured in the MTFS budget papers that the Director of Finance is preparing. So I was just highlighting that to your attention before we go into the rest of the report. So in terms of the treasury strategy itself, I'll just give a bit of a background on the report. He has been included as part of this report as Appendix 1. It's about 20 pages long. various sections that look at each of the different elements of treasury management. What I would do in this opening remarks is just highlight the few key areas that I would like to bring to your attention. Of course, happy to take any questions on any part of the strategy this evening. The first thing to highlight is the economic outlook, which you will find in section 2 of the appendix. And essentially just highlights the economic environment that the council is currently operating it. Again, this is not unique to Haringey. These are the global factors, higher inflation, higher interest rates, but also a weakening economic outlook. All these factors essentially mean, so I'm getting a bit of feedback. Yeah, so I was gonna, all right, so all these factors essentially mean that the cost of borrowing for the council going forward is likely to be higher, and that's something that's been factored in the preparation of the statement. But at the same time, the amount of money that the council is able to receive from its deposits has also increased. So there is a net benefit from deposits and also a net pressure from the higher interest rates. So this is something that's articulated in section 2, and it sort of provides an outlook of what we feel, of what the advisors, Alan Close, feel will be the future cycle for the economy. In section 6.9, it just articulates the council's underlying need to borrow, which is also referred to as the CFR. This essentially is the number or the amount of money that the council will need to borrow over the MTFS to fund its capital programs. In preparing this, we have provided both.
Tim, hold on a minute. Could you please highlight the page that you of the report that you're talking about?
Right. So I was referring to the main report, but let me see if I can find the same one. If I can just ask if Naz, if you could just I'm getting some feedback.
So Tim, if you can, yeah, there's a bit of feedback, but if you can, so which page are you referring on your main, is it page 3 that you're referring to?
Yeah, so let me just
page 3 on the main report, yeah? Okay.
Yeah. You just
continue.
All right. So yeah, so the page that I am referring to is yes, page 3 on the agenda item. So in page 3, it just outlines the capital financing requirement, which is essentially the amount of money that the council needs to borrow to finance its capital programs. In this consideration, it takes into account the general fund as well as the HRA. So these are schemes that involve anything to do with capital programs for maybe school repairs, but also the housing revenue account looks at the housing plan for the council. So these have been shown in section 3 of this report, where it details how much each of those schemes is anticipated to grow over the MTFS period. In section 6.10, still on page 3, the only thing I'd highlight is the assumptions that have been included in this budget setting period. The first assumption is for any new long-term loans is 5.5%. That has changed from last year. The assumption we had made last year when we set the budget was 4.5%. But over the course of the year, we've seen that rates have increased more than was anticipated at the beginning of the budget setting period. There's also been a notable improvement in the amount of or the average rate that we expect to get from our deposits. So any money we place with the debt management office or money market funds. Last year, that was 3.5%. That's now been increased this year to 4.5%, again, to reflect this higher interest rate environment that the council is operating in. So moving on to the borrowing strategy now. Again, the main point to highlight to members is the council's main objective when setting the borrowing strategy is to try and strike an appropriate balance between securing low interest costs and also achieving cost certainty over the period that the funds are required for. So further details of how that will be done in terms of the sources that will be that we're able to borrow from, they're detailed in section 4 of the main appendix. But there's also a table that highlights what the change in rates has been over the course of the year, which is the rates that the council borrow from the PWB. Moving on to the Treasury investment strategy. Again, the main, to summarize the strategy for the council is, again, to strike a balance between the risk and return. We're making treasury investments, and the SIPA code recommends that local authorities should always apply the security and the liquidity of investment counterparties before looking to seek any optimum yield. At Haringey, we have a fairly conservative portfolio. We tend to deposit most of our money with the Debt Management Office, which is a government agency. But from time to time, we also place money with money market funds. But in section 5 of this report, it actually details the proposed counterparties and investment limits and treasury risk assessment and the ongoing treasury risk assessment. And again, this is following advice that we see from our treasury advisors, Alan Close. Then the final point that I just wanted to highlight to members was the treasury management prudential indicators, which you can find on section 6 of the report. This is the framework that as officers we are required to operate within. So it sets out where we can deposit our money, what maturities we can have those money in. But one of the key changes this year is the prudential indicator on short-term borrowing. In previous year, the council has taken a lot of short-term borrowing where rates were lower. That was a more cost-effective approach, given that rates are higher, and in some cases, short-term rates are even more expensive than long-term rates. That has been reflected in this strategy now by requiring the authority to hold less short-term borrowing than it's done in the past. So that's reduced from 30% last year to 20% this year. So I think those are the main points to highlight, but I'm happy to take any more questions on any other sections included in the appendix to this report.
Thank you, Tim. So is there any questions from members? Councillor Amin. Yep.
I was just going to ask Tim if it's been signed off by the Cabinet Member for Finance and by the Cabinet, or?
So this report, the Treasury Management Strategy, is signed off by the full council, but it goes to full council on recommendation from this committee.
But has it been signed off by the Cabinet Member for Finance?
No, it won't have been signed off yet. This committee is responsible for recommending it to full council. At the full council where the budget is approved, which I believe is in March, that's when this report will be formally adopted. But the Cabinet member has been consulted on the report and has seen the report before it came to this committee.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Amin. So Councillor Audit.
Thank you, Tim. Just going through the report and just what you've basically said about the key change really being around the prudential indicators in terms of, I think that's one of the main changes that's been implemented into this strategy. And I think I welcome that because it's just added kind of risk mitigation in terms of the strategy. I'm just kind of concerned in terms of what we kind of see in the news in terms of the financial situation across the country, and going into like the current climate nationally and how that affects us locally. It just makes you anxious in regard to our financial situation, and I just want to know how confident are you in relation to our current reserves, and are we being prudent in our investments and returns? So I welcome it. Looks like there are measures being put in place in the strategy. I just want to get that reassurance considering what's happening.
Yes, thank you for your question, Councillor Audit. So it is a challenging environment, not only for all local authorities, but across, I would say, all global economies, especially given these factors. I think I summarized them in the opening remarks with regards to not only higher inflation or higher interest rates, but now a slowing economy. So that presents a challenge, and compounded by the funding issues to local authorities, that makes it a lot more difficult to operate in. So I think that's been considered in terms of the budget, which members have been consulted on. Where Treasury Management is involved in the process is articulating what we feel those interest costs will be, given the council's spending plans. But that's something that's sort of being considered, and that's something I think that the Director of Finance will speak to in a little bit more detail. What this report does is, given that framework and given the budget process for the council, there then has to be risks management, and there has to be a control in terms of how those in-year decisions are made. And essentially, that's what this report is presenting, that there is a budget that Treasury Management has to stick by. There are also ways in terms of risks. You don't want to be investing or depositing money with companies, especially when there's an economic sort of tightening, as we're seeing now. Depositing money with a company that goes bankrupt would mean that we lose that money. So this report is trying to build in those controls. So there's counterparty limits in terms of how much you can place with different institutions. But at the same time, there's also a consideration of the relative expensiveness of borrowing. So what the approach in the Treasury strategy at the moment is looking at is also acknowledging that interest rates are higher, but there has to be a framework in terms of how those decisions during the course of the year will be done, which again is assessed through the affordability of the budget setting process that's set with the council. So when this goes to full council, when it's been adopted, it is an appendix to the main budget. This is a report that should be read alongside the budget, because a lot of what's been agreed in the budget would flow into how that's then implemented during the course of 24-25.
Yeah, you're on that one. Yeah.
I've kind of also noticed that as part of the approved counterparties, page 15 of the report, it's also noted that we also utilise banks and building societies unsecured and registered providers unsecured, and underneath that it mentions some risks involved in those unsecured institutions. How often do we utilise those institutions? I mean, are we heavily reliant on them, or do we try to avoid that?
Yeah, so in the past, I think during my time at Haringey, we've never placed any deposits or any arrangement with the bank. The main ones is just through our Barclays Bank that we use for day-to-day cash flow management, but we've never actually secured a term deposit with any other bank. It is included in the strategy because there are times where, especially the bigger banks, can be offering more attractive rates. But again, I think the focus for our strategy has always been to go for the most safe counterparties, which in this case is the UK government through the Debt Management Office, and then money market funds, which are usually AA rated, which is the highest sort of investment grade rating you can get. And then if the council has excess liquidity, and by excess liquidity meaning more money than we normally would to do our 3 months payments, then we can place into areas such as banks, such as building societies, if they're offering a higher rate. But given how Haringey has been managing its cash, there has never been a need for us to sort of place that extra money with the banks. But it is there in the strategy in case that's something that becomes attractive for the council to utilize.
Yeah,
Councillor Mason.
thank you. Thanks a lot, Tim, and for the great explanations you always give. Can I just ask you two general questions? First of all, I wanted to know about the risk that you talked about with the capital plans, as they're the main driver for the council's borrowing requirement, and whether I see that the division between the general fund and the housing revenue account is more explicit. Which is positive, I think. Could you just tell us whether the risk is higher for the housing revenue account? I'm just starkly aware that some of the capital expenditure has not gone ahead this year because of failed programmes, not by the council's failure, but because of the materials not being available, contractors going bust, etc. And obviously that bears a heavy weight on the council in terms of finances, and also on our residents in terms of our inability to house people. So I'm really interested in that, and to think about what safeguards you put in place to ensure that the capital plans that we have are prudent and affordable, as you say, but also that we're not too risk averse because of the other stresses on our overall budget. So that's the first, is that kind of security versus risk and how those are balanced. So that's the first question I've got. I'll come to the second question after that.
Okay, yes, that's fine. So yeah, to answer the question, Councillor Mason, with regards to the council's sort of capital plans, that is something that has been considered as part of the budget, and that is in effect because the council had to acknowledge that the environment that we're operating in has changed. So one of the key things, which I think I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks, is the discount rate that's applied to these capital programs, which is the 5.5%. Last year, when those schemes were being assessed, it was based on 4.5%. And as a result, it means that quite a number of schemes, quite a significant part of the schemes, are not able to pass that minimum benchmark for them to be affordable for the council, and in fact would be, would be an additional sort of risk on the council in terms of they take on a project that they might not be able to either see through completely or at least to an adverse financial position. So those are things that are considered in terms of setting the capital program. I'm sure the Director of Finance, John Warlow, has been doing a lot of consultation with members in terms of addressing what those implications are, because there is an acknowledgement that if the borrowing becomes too high, then it will take a big part of the budget, a revenue budget, which would then have an impact on the other revenue plans that the council has in place. With regards to HRA, HRA has got a different funding structure to the general fund. So a lot of the HRA borrowing has been assessed in line with the HRA business plan. So those are robustly tested. I'm not sure exactly how that goes through the council in terms of how it's approved, but those are basically outputs from the HRA business plan, and they inform us that this is how much they intend to borrow. We also inform them what the borrowing rates are. They are figured into that plan, and then the decisions are being made. So I think in terms of the reduction, it's mainly really just acknowledging that the cost of borrowing is higher. And if the cost of borrowing wants to become lower, then I'm sure there'll be, again, another reassessment on some of those projects that have either been paused or that have sort of dropped out from the capital program.
Yeah, I do understand that. The thing that I suppose I'm less clear about is that we've made a decision, as you said, 5.5%, and clearly that impacts on the amount of money we have for the capital program. So the decision, your decision, or the decision of the Treasury, our decision, has an impact then on our capital programs. So the question I've got really is about the risk level that we've decided on in terms of going over 5.5 and you know, whether that risk could be altered a bit, or whether you think that it's you've judged that properly, or whether maybe that's too high or too low. I'm just acutely aware that these houses are waiting to be built, and they can't be built when if we have interest rates which are set at which mean that our capital programme has to be reduced.
Yes, I think to answer that question in part, it might be in the main report, not the appendix, where I've included the table in terms of the cost of borrowing over the year. And it has fluctuated, but there has been a large part of the year where the borrowing was above 5.5%, which would have meant that if the council was borrowing at that level, that would be even more expensive than what we're saying. But there has been obviously different elements of volatility. So in terms of the 5.5%, that comes from the advice we receive from our Treasury advisors. There is in this report an economic outlook that they have. I think it might be in the very last section or maybe as an appendix. And they'll be assessing this based on market movements, how different products in the market, such as credit default swaps, are being priced. And they'll come up with an assumption of where they feel the future trend will be, not only for the bank rate, but for rates as a whole. And that's what then is included in terms of our assessment. So it is based on sort of that advice. And then there is a buffer in there as well, just to make sure that the council is being prudent, but not overly prudent. But yeah, primarily the 5.5 comes from advice from the Treasury advisors.
Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly the point I was getting to. So thank you for being so clear about it. I think that comes back to page 16 and the forecast. The MPC held bank rate at 5.25 in December. We believe this is peak the bank rate, but we've decided to use the 5.5%, and I presume that's what you're talking about in terms of risk leeway. Yeah. So, but by doing that, how much have we lost in our capital spending?
Yes, so maybe I'll just, I wasn't sure what page you're referring to in page 16, where it has the peak in the bank rate. But the bank rate is just the rate that the other banks can borrow from the Bank of England. That's not necessarily directly related to how much the council can borrow from the PWB. At times, how much the council can borrow from the PWB is considerably higher, because the PWB itself applies a 1% threshold to whatever the gilt yields are, which is the cost of borrowing that the UK government issues on a regular basis. And then it prices that into how much, as an authority, we're able to borrow. We get a 20% discount, a 0.2% discount on some of the loans, and on the HRA loans, I think it's a bit lower. So the bank rate might move up and down, but the long-term cost of borrowing might still remain higher, because the way interest rates are costed, there is the bank rates level, but there's also the risk that the market's perceived into the relative fiscal position of the UK. So you remember, I think last year or 2 years ago, when the government came up with a budget and rates went to spike up to 6%, the Bank of England hadn't done any changing on its rates. That was all based on the market's view of how precarious the UK fiscal situation looked like. So Allen Close take that into account. They take into account the bank rate, because that does have a big impact. If it was to drop 2%, then that would be material. And again, that would be an opportunity for us to refinance that. I think in this particular report, it's just acknowledging that there is more risk that rates will remain higher. And if the council was to borrow at this, then there are risks that those costs will go into the budget, and other revenue streams or other revenue projects might then have to be stopped instead of the capital schemes.
Okay. Can I have my second question? Is that possible?
Yeah.
Okay, so my second question is related to page 10, I think, was page 16 on the overall pack, and page 10 on this report, which looks at reputational aspects of risk. So if I could then flick back to ESG policy and the environmental, social and governance considerations, and move on to approved counterparties, have we looked at the approved counterparties in terms of and the place to borrow from, in terms of the environmental, social and governance considerations, particularly around environmental, given the policy of the council around environmental issues? So I think it's really important that we're not investing or borrowing from people where there is high risk around the environment.
Yes, so I think that's a fair point. In terms of ESG itself, there hasn't been a direct assessment that's been done by the council in terms of what those risks are. The reason for that is most of our deposits are done by the UK government, and essentially it would be just assessing whether the UK government is investing in an ESG friendly way. And most of those deposits are very short term in terms of overnight. So when we place money with the debt management office, that money is returned to us the very next day. So there's very much little of use that could have been done in terms of investing in other projects. But where this does play a role, where it would be more interesting, is in those other pooled organizations, I think that outlined in the additional investment limits on table 6. Some of those providers will actually have an impact on ESG. There's some sort of REITs, the real estate investment trusts, that focus only on improving affordable housing, but also making the housing more environmentally friendly. So those will be considered if the council was to go into that. But as you know, the council strategy recently, since my time here, and I think it probably is the long-standing strategy, has not been to invest in those type of vehicles. Sometimes when you place your money, it's very difficult in terms of when that money comes back. It's a 5-year deposit. It's more long-term in nature. But that's really where the ESG impact will have a higher impact. Whereas most of the decisions from a deposit point of view for the council is purely just inputting money overnight, same as you do in a bank account. And yeah, nothing really sort of where you'd have an ESG impact that can be assessed on a reliable basis.
So Chair, Sorry? Yeah, if you don't mind, yeah.
Yeah.
Just, I just think it's a question to yourself, Chair, about whether we would be able to put a marker on this to say that we want to know if there's been any, if there is any borrowing or investment usage of key organisations that are, for example, Shell, that we know are still exploiting environmental oil and those issues. We know that the government allows that to happen. But we in Harringay put a policy around that, and so I think it's important that we follow that through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, that's fine. Yeah, happy to take that away. Yeah, but just to be clear to members, the Treasury investment would never sort of invest in Shell because that would be considered an actual company equity, which is more higher risk. So that's not something that the Treasury would invest in, even without ESG considerations.
Usually added.
Right, so is that okay? So we've got Councillor Rossetti online. I think you have a question, Councillor?
Yes, and thank you, Chair, for letting me asking questions. I have a couple of questions. And so the first one is on section 4, the borrowing strategy. So we refer to authorized limits. Now, in the previous report that was presented to Council, we have a table in the report, table 4, which was providing the borrowing limits. And we had this table in all the previous quarters report, but for some reason we don't have it in this document, which is the one that as a committee we will send to full council for approval. So I wonder why, and I think personally it would be reassuring to have this table or a statement that says that we are within this limit in this report. So that's the first point. I see that it reminds to a capital strategy, but I think that like last year's and all the others report, it would be best to have it here. And then the second question is on the prudential indicators. So we have a list of several indicators here in section 6. And again, in the quarterly reports that we receive, we are told if we are compliant or not with these indicators. But for some reason, it's not in this report. So I wonder if it's possible to clarify that we are compliant with our own prudential indicators and met them. And perhaps also understanding, because I can see that they change from year to year. So those indicators reflect best practices that are adopted elsewhere. And sorry, just to conclude, there was an investment strategy in last year's report, which perhaps I think it would be relevant considering the question that Councillor Mason has just asked, which I don't see in this report, because we do have the Treasury investment strategy, but not the investment strategy that was in the previous report last year. So just if you could please comment on this. Thank you.
Yes, so Councillor Rossetti, what was the last table I think you referenced on the prudential indicators before I answer your question?
So that would be page 17 on the main report. So we have one on security, liquidity, interest rate exposure, maturity structure of borrowing, short-term borrowing, and there are some targets. And in the quarterly report, we always have a column next to them that says compliant, yes, 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 yes. So I think that even more reason for this, which is, the strategy to set to full council, maybe to let everyone know that we are compliant.
Okay, so I'll tackle that last point first. So in terms of the strategy, these prudential indicators that have been set here are the ones that will be going into the future quarterly reports. In terms of that's where we'll be marking our compliance against. Okay. And full council received the media reports, which will have those compliant figures in there. So this is setting those standards for next time. So we have changed quite a few of them just to reflect one, how the current council is implementing its strategy, but two, also the economic environment. So with regards to the other things that are missing, such as the investment strategy and the reports, this is because the CIPFA code, which has been adopted by the council, actually does not require those to be included in this report. And I think you pointed that with the table that it is in the capital strategy because it's required to sit in that capital strategy, and so is the investment strategy. So they are all supposed to be in that document, and treasury strategy is just supposed to be focused on the treasury management of the risks. Because some of the elements of the investment strategy looks at how the council deals with investments in the local community, such as giving loans to small businesses. That's not considered the treasury management activity, but it is part of the capital structure of the council. So it would fall under the bracket of capital strategy. So I'm happy to bring in that table back in terms of if that's helpful for members as an additional prudential indicators, because the CIPFA code actually allows for any indicators that members would find to be useful to be included. So I'm happy to sort of bring that table back in, but it is already in the capital strategy. And then on the investment strategy, that can't necessarily be included in this report, but I can follow up as to where else that has been included going forward.
Thank you. I think if all the members agree, it might be useful to have at least the table or a statement that says that yes, we are, with this projection, we will be within the limits of the borrowing limits. So even if it's reported somewhere else, I mean, the budget is so many documents, and I think it might be helpful.
So it's just on the prudential indicators to say that will be compliant with the prudential indicators.
No. I mean the table for the borrowing limits. Yes, I appreciate why we cannot say now if we will be compliant in the future. I apologize. I didn't think about it. There was a for the future. Yeah, but perhaps yes, about the borrowing limit, it might be useful. Yes, to say that we are below the limit. Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah, I think if the chair is happy with that, I can amend the report to include that before it goes to final to full council.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that would be great to be added. Thanks, Tim. Is there any further questions?
This meeting?
No. Great. So just be one. So the recommendation is to agree the proposed updated Treasury Management Strategy Statement for 2024 and 25, and to recommend to the full council for approval with those things I mentioned, the table and the what Councillor Mason has mentioned in terms of the Treasury investment. And also to note that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee at this meeting on 18th of January 2024 and the Cabinet Member for Finance have been consulted in the preparation of the Treasury Management Statement. Are we in agreement? Okay, great. Thank you so much. Any new items of urgent business? Okay, so our next meeting it's on the 7th of March. Is that right? Okay, excellent. That's okay. Anything else?
Sorry.
Yes.
On the website, it says that there is a meeting of the Audit Committee on the 1st of February.
That will be removed.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so our next meeting is on the 7th of March. Is there any comments from the people from online? No, from the officers? Legal? Great. Thanks so much, Tim, for your time. I know it's been a busy day for you today. Well done.
Thank you, Chair. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Not yet, until after the full council meeting, when the officially become. I really wanted them to attend the meetings. That's nice. Yeah.